I'm doing the webinar, or doing a webinar tonight, and actually it's an amazing thing, and it makes me feel so grateful in the sense that I'm doing a webinar on emotional validation tonight, and I'm doing a unicycle ride for multiple sclerosis in July, and it's 80 kilometers. It's 160 kilometers or 100 miles over 2 days, and it's going to be a long ride on my unicycle. I've never done anything that long before, and I thought, well, in order to raise money, how am I going to raise money? You need to raise $300. And I thought, well, I'll do a webinar and, say if, emotional validation and say, if you want to attend, then just make a contribution, whatever feels good to you. And I'll send you the link. And it's amazing. I've raised like $900. So that's great. And I'm doing a webinar on one of my favorite subjects. So that's amazing too. But, and in the webinar, I got thinking about this idea of dynamic effectiveness, because I think it's something that's really important. And I'm going to sit here and talk about it because it's what I feel like talking about on my DailyCast, and maybe it'll help me make some more sense of it. Because it's really just, I have this tendency to like to label things or brand them. I don't know if it makes me feel smart or what, and maybe dynamic effectiveness is already a thing, but whatever. Until I find out otherwise, it's my thing, or until I lose interest and never mention it again. But anyways, I think what's really cool and a really important skill to develop is the understanding. So when I say dynamic effectiveness, what I'm thinking about is how being effective is context specific, and that context is informed by all kinds of different variables. So for example, and actually let me back up and say, when we talk about emotional validation, it really is about being effective versus being right. And I really think that's a lot of a huge problem that people get into. And trust me, myself included, is that when you're disagreeing, like say if you have a disagreement about someone with someone, we often try to be right, and so if I'm having a disagreement with Tanya, for example, I'll say, I don't know, I just sometimes get wrapped up in just making sure that my point of view, that she accepts my point of view. Maybe even if she doesn't really accept it, sometimes I feel like maybe I just want to hear that she accepts my point of view. I don't know. Actually, that's a really interesting thing now that I said that out loud. But what really matters is being effective versus being right. Because in order to be effective, you can both be right at the same time. I think that's like in dialectical behavioral therapy, which is what's often used for borderline personality disorder. It's like holding these two sort of seemingly opposing ideas of acceptance and change, right? So, and it's the same thing. I guess it's a very similar thing with dynamic effectiveness, or is that you can both be right. It's not a zero-sum game, right? So you both have different truths, different opinions, different experiences, different beliefs, different cultural history, life's experience, blah, 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 all those things. And so you can look at the same situation or same set of, quote, facts and derive a completely different interpretation from them. And that's okay. That's actually an amazing thing that makes the world so great. So if you operate it from that point of view, from that as, one of your operating assumptions that there's no single truth, then it gives you, maybe opens a mind to exploring what it means to be effective. So, and I think being effective, as I said, it's not only context specific, but when it happens in real time, like it's fluid at the same time, and it happens in real time, and you have a lot of inputs coming at you in any moment to figure out what being effective is. Like some of those inputs might be, the words your partner's saying, their emotions, your emotions, the tone of voice, body language, history, goals, the relationship between the two of you. Like, is it husband, wife, or, husband, partner, say, or parent, child, or friends, or contacts like family, work. Like there's all these different things that contribute to a very fluid situation. So to be able to manage all that in real time, it takes a lot of practice and a lot of skill, and you're going to fuck it up, right? Like obviously. So I'll give you an example of what I'm thinking about here, because, so for example, if my daughter is upset about school, say, and she is extremely, extremely upset, as a 14-year-old can be. and if I'm talking to her and if I'm emotionally validating her, and like, what does it mean to be effective? So, let's say a previous version of myself, being effective might have meant making her understand that while she is upset, she's going to school and she might as well just change her attitude about it and change her feelings about it because you got to go. And so, there's no point in whining about it. That's definitely what a younger version of me probably would have said. I guess you can't say definitely and probably. That's probably what a younger version of me would have said. Where now I would look at being effective as, okay, I want her to know that she's seen and heard. And because I want to do what I can and use the tools that I have to create a situation where she feels like, where there's a human connection, and it can be, which will help her de-escalate, probably, not necessarily, but probably. And in that space, in that calmer space, in that space of connection, maybe she'd be open to talking about what's going on and hearing my opinion. So that might be being effective in that situation. With my wife, let's say we are talking about money, for example, and so being effective would be, it might be, remembering that the goal of the conversation is to get on the same page and to make sure that we continue to work towards the financial future that we want to create, not about being right. So those are two very different things, right? And it means being very open and dynamic, hence, the word dynamic effectiveness, but being dynamic about what is the goal of this particular interaction, and keeping your eye on that prize and being open to change it too, right? Like, because as things come up and maybe somebody gets triggered about something and it gets quite emotional, it all changes. So I've been thinking about that lately. I don't really know too much how to talk about it, but I just thought I'd blurt it out because I think it's an idea I want to explore more. We're going to talk about it on the webinar tonight. So, and I like, for me, coming up with these ideas or just, again, I'm sure I haven't come up with this idea. It's not like there really are very few original ideas, or maybe every idea is original because nobody ever thought of it through my own lens, whatever. So yeah, that's, I feel good about that. I really feel good about how I am piecing together my presentation for the Dad Edge Summit this week, because I've learned some interesting things. Like, one thing I learned that's super relevant to that particular presentation, but I think it's really relevant to us all, is like, I'm very fascinated about the idea of emotions and understanding emotions, and that there are no good or bad emotions. And I listened to a really interesting TED Talk yesterday. I'm going to try to get this woman on the podcast, talking about just how we talk about the emotions and actually feel about our own emotions, is dependent on is also fluid, and it changes over time. So there's inputs to that too. So there's, culture, language, nationality, all of that kind of stuff, like societal norms, expectations, etc. They all contribute to how we feel and react to the emotions that we are experiencing. So an example that the speaker used was that right now we are always told to strive for happiness. That's the beautiful and desired end state. And if you're not happy, there's something wrong, or you need to do something, take some kind of intervention to try to move you back towards a state of being happier. Right. And that's a modern Western phenomenon. And then she talks about how in the 1600s, or 16th century, I guess, so 1500s, it was very different, where sadness was encouraged. Sadness was, in the quote self-help books at the time, I don't know what that would have looked like, but it was highly encouraged to cultivate the skill of sadness. And because the idea being that being good at being sad would make you more resilient to the bad shit that would inevitably happen to you. And so it was really important, right? And so it's so funny though, because if you think about that nowadays, if you feel sadness, especially if you're a dude, you feel sadness, you feel like there's something wrong with you. There might even be some shame associated with feeling sadness, where back in the 1600s, if you were sad, if you felt sadness, you were a badass because you had developed a skill that was thought to be very important at that time. So think about that. Like, think about what that means. What it really means is that we have a tremendous amount of power to rewrite how we feel about the things that we feel, or how we perceive the things that we feel, or how we talk about the things that we feel. So what I'm hoping for in the pod with my talk is to, bring this up and also talk about how we all have the power to create that culture and those norms in this moment, in this environment, in this group, at this summit, and I think that's going to be a really cool takeaway, or a really cool thing to think about for the people in the room. But just bring a little bit more awareness. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to giving this talk. I feel like it's going to be good. I want it to be super impactful. I don't want to say I get anxious. You know what I get anxious about, or maybe uncertain about, is I want to always take things to another level of impact, and like, so for this one, I'm thinking about channeling my inner Tony Robbins and doing some interesting things that I haven't done before, about getting the audience involved and pumped up. And, I'm going to do it, and I'm pretty pumped about it, but there's always a level of trepidation when you try to do something different, because what if it doesn't go the way you want? However, what's really helped me, get over that is really the idea of starting to look at everything like an experiment, because how the fuck would you know if something's going to turn out the way you want unless you try it? You don't know if a decision's the right one until after you've already made it. So if I really feel like if the things that I try are nothing more than an experiment, and an experiment yields, I have a hypothesis about how people will react. I feel like a scientist here, which is funny because I was so terrible in science. I actually took biochemistry in college and dropped out after a year because I was so incompetent. But regardless, maybe it's more of a junior social pseudoscientist than I am. But so I just look at it as an experiment. So if it doesn't, I don't know how it's going to turn out. I have an idea about how I think it is going to turn out, but I do not know. And therefore, I'm going to try it. And if it produces an interesting result, every result will be interesting, right? So, but if it produces a result I think, then cool. And maybe I'll find a way to do more of that. And if it doesn't go the way I want, if people just stare at me and there's crickets, you know what? I'm okay with that too. Because that will help me inform future talks that I give to people, and I do the same thing at work too. Like, I've done some really interesting things around appreciative inquiry and the 4 disciplines of execution at work. And you never know how it's going to go. How are people going to respond to this stuff? Asking powerful questions, focusing on the positive, because it's not what they're used to. And I had this thing at work a couple of weeks ago where I got the team to design a scorecard. So I got a big sheet of stick-on whiteboard paper and put on a table and brought some markers, and we had worked up to this moment, and then it was a relatively new team. People didn't know each other very well. And I said, okay, based on everything all the work we've done so far, you guys create the scorecard that is going to connect with you most deeply, so we can track what we're doing and see if we're winning or losing and all that kind of stuff. And, I didn't know how that was going to go. And where a younger me, I often talk about a younger me, and I feel like I'm annoying myself, and I may be annoying others, but regardless, excuse me. I got morning throat because it's only 5:23 in the morning. I had a podcast guest stand me up today. I'm sure he didn't actually stand me up, but maybe there was some technical difficulty, so we'll reschedule. But regardless, I didn't know how it was going to go. And so an earlier version of me really would have wrapped up a lot of my own I don't know. I really would have wanted to make it work, I guess is a thing, because I would have wrapped up my own sense of self-worth somehow in the result, like everybody coming together and working on it. And so I would have, and I would have, that energy of feeling that kind of stress about this has got to work because it's a reflection on me as a leader. I mean, that would have influenced the energy I was putting into the room and probably would have made it work out worse than what I was hoping. This time, what I did was I thought, okay, all these people, they don't know each other. They've never done this. I'm sure nobody's done an exercise like this, or likely not done an exercise like this. And let's see how it goes. And if it works, like I'm hoping, then that's wonderful. And if it doesn't, I'm ready for the awkward, And what ended up happening was, it was pretty awkward at the beginning. People staring at this big blank piece of whiteboard paper, not having anywhere to start, and I just was, comfortable sitting in the awkward. And it wasn't really awkward for me. I was fine. It was awkward for them. And, eventually somebody picked up a marker and then drew something, and that triggered somebody else to say something. And you can see where this is going. An amazing scorecard was built, took about 45 minutes, and everybody participated, and I loved it. And it was absolutely fantastic. But the point is that, and I told the team after, I had no idea how this was going to go. And so I'm happy. But regardless of what happened, it would have been interesting no matter what. So my point is, treating things like an experiment, I think, is really important to give yourself the mindset to be able to take, the first, a different step, because all you're going to get back is results. So I really try to live my life a lot that way. And I mean, I'm not always successful in thinking that. There's always times where I wrap up my own, my sense of self or whatever, or some aspect of my sense of self in the result. But, I'm getting much better at that, because I realize that we're going to make mistakes. Well, it's not a mistake if you look at it as an experiment, but we're going to produce an incredible variety of results through the choices that we make, some of which we like, some of which we don't like, and it's all part of the journey. So yeah, so anyways, my point in saying all that is I'm really looking forward to giving the talk. I mean, it's obviously on my mind. I get very focused in a way that before I do one of these things, and often in a way that's just a jumble of thoughts and then slowly crystallizing over time. So I still feel like I'm in the jumble of thoughts point, which is probably a little late in the game, but I know this material well enough that it's only a 20-minute talk, and then the rest of it is Q&A, which I really like that idea, because I love the idea of audience interaction. I know this material so well that I'm very comfortable talking about it with a lot of preparation. But this time what I'm doing is I'm incorporating some new stuff, so some new concepts for me. And so I'm pumped about that. So I need to do a little bit more work on that, which I'll be doing today and tomorrow. And then we'll be leaving on Wednesday for a 11 and a half hour drive to St. Louis. So it just feels like such an amazing honor to be able to participate in something like this, and to be surrounded by these kinds of people, and to be the first speaker, which is amazing. I would have been happy speaking anywhere, but it's really nice to be able to open it and to have the opportunity to help set the tone for what we want to create over the next few days. That feels amazing to me. And just so happy that I've done the work to get here, and knowing that the level of work will continue in some form or another. Who knows what it'll look like, but it'll take me to different places in the future. And knowing that I have the power to do that. I mean, that can be overwhelming at times, to be honest with you, knowing that you have that much power to create the life that you want. It can be terrifying. It's much easier to just tell yourself the bullshit story that you're a passenger and life is happening to you. But I read a really good quote the other day, and it's, we don't, I might bastardize this, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And that's a really important thing. So as I do this podcast and do these daily casts, I want to continue to evolve who I am, so I understand, so I look at the world in a different way. That's again, terrifying, but thrilling at the same time. And maybe those two things go hand in hand. Maybe it's kind of like that dialectical concept before: acceptance, change, two different truths, and something can be terrifying and thrilling all at the same time, right? So I think that's what I got for today. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you on tomorrow's DailyCast. And I'm sure I'm going to miss a bunch of days this week because I'm going to be out of town. But regardless, I'll do what I can.